The phone vibrated on my table at 2:14 in the middle of the night. My heart immediately started racing. I, Alex Morgan, 32, a software engineer, know that late-night calls rarely bring good news when your boyfriend is a firefighter. The illuminated screen showed the name Ethan. I answered with a trembling voice only to hear his laugh on the other end. "Hey, sleepyhead. I managed to get off early. I'm on my way home and I have a surprise for you tonight." That wasn't the first time Ethan turned my fear into relief and then into anticipation. I moved to Chicago after the divorce, determined to start over far from Portland's memories and expectations. I never imagined I'd find someone like him in my new life. If you've ever felt that unique mix of adrenaline and anxiety when you get an unexpected message from the one you love, hit like right now. My apartment was on the 4th floor of a red brick building in the Wicker Park neighborhood. From the tall windows, I watched the city wake up every day. The wooden floor creaked lightly under my bare feet as I made coffee in the small open kitchen. On the walls, black and white photos of Chicago blended with some of my favorite landscapes from the Pacific Northwest, a silent reminder of the roots I left behind. My mornings began with strong coffee and coding. I worked remotely for a digital security company, which meant I rarely had to leave that cozy space. My days went by in a steady rhythm of virtual meetings and solving technical problems. The nights, however, varied depending on Ethan's shift at Station 51. When he was on duty, I dove into personal projects until late. When he was home, we turned the routine into something special, improvised dinners, binge-watching TV shows, or long conversations on the small balcony while watching the city lights. It was on an ordinary Tuesday that Ethan Sullivan entered my life. I was at a cafe near my apartment, wrestling with a persistent bug, when the sprinkler system went off without warning. Within seconds, everyone was soaked, and electronic gear was at risk. In the chaos of everyone scrambling to save their stuff, my laptop slipped and fell on the flooded floor. "Looks like it's been a rough day for you," said a deep voice beside me as I stared at my ruined computer. I looked up to see a tall man in a firefighter's uniform with a comforting smile. "I'm Ethan. I came to check on the false alarm, but it looks like I was too late to save your laptop." "Alex," I replied, extending a wet hand. "And yeah, I just lost 3 days of unsaved work stored on the cloud." "Well, Alex, maybe that calls for a consolation coffee once we're done here. I know a great place 2 blocks away that, as far as I know, has sprinklers working properly." The place was temporarily closed for cleaning, but Ethan, at 35 with his natural charm, managed to convince the manager to serve us 2 cups of coffee while we sat on the steps by the entrance. For an hour, I completely forgot about the tech disaster as he shared stories of unusual rescues and I explained exactly what a digital security engineer did all day. In the following weeks, our paths kept crossing coincidentally. Ethan showed up at the same park where I usually ran. We ended up exploring the Museum of Science and Industry together after I mentioned wanting to visit it. He taught me the basics of basketball on a public court, laughing at my complete lack of coordination. I introduced him to the world of modern board games at a specialty cafe. "I never thought I'd get so hooked on chasing down train routes," he admitted after our 3rd consecutive game. During a street food festival, Ethan took me to meet his team members. I was surprised by how naturally he introduced me, his hand occasionally touching my shoulder or back. Captain Rodriguez and his wife invited us to a barbecue the following weekend. "They liked you," Ethan commented as we walked back. Not that I was worried. "Are you talking about me at the station?" I asked, genuinely surprised. "Alex, I talk about you so much that they practically already consider you part of the team." Our first obstacle came 3 months later when I got an offer to lead a project in Seattle. It was temporary, 6 months, but it represented a significant step forward in my career. When I told Ethan during dinner, the silence between us grew heavy. "That's amazing," he finally said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "You deserve this opportunity." That night, lying in bed, the tension was palpable. Ethan stared at the ceiling, lost in thought. "My ex-husband accepted a job in New York," I eventually confessed. "It was the beginning of the end for us." I promised myself I'd never put my career above a relationship again. Ethan turned to me. And I promised I'd never be the guy who holds someone back. I saw my dad do that to my mom until she stopped dreaming for herself. The conflict wasn't just logistical, it was existential. I was afraid of repeating the patterns of my failed marriage. Ethan was battling against the example set by his parents. And both of us were facing the universal fear that distance could erode what we were building. How do we make this work? I asked, vulnerability evident in my voice. Honestly? I don't know, answered Ethan, intertwining his fingers with mine. But I do know I want to try. And that's more certain than I've ever been in any other relationship. Ethan's last 48-hour shift coincided with the deadline for my biggest project before moving to Seattle. When we finally saw each other, exhaustion was written all over our faces. Ethan had just come off a fire at an industrial warehouse that almost got out of control. I had spent 2 nights in a row debugging a critical system. Come with me, he said, taking my hand after we finished a simple meal. I want to show you something. We headed to the rooftop of my building, a space we rarely used. Ethan had transformed the place. Tiny lights were hanging on nearly invisible wires, creating an artificial starry sky above us. A thick blanket was spread on the floor with cushions and a bottle of wine waiting. The surprise you mentioned? I asked, feeling a warmth spread through my chest. Part of it, he replied, pulling me down to sit beside him. I thought we needed a moment just for us before everything changes. The city sparkled around us, the building lights competing with the stars Ethan had created. The cool October air made us get even closer. We talked about everything and nothing, his plans to visit Seattle, my worries about the new project, childhood stories we hadn't yet shared. Did you know my mom always said I'd fall for someone smarter than me for my own good? Ethan commented, his fingers tracing circles in the palm of my hand. And is that a good thing or a bad thing? I asked, watching his profile against the lit-up horizon. It's perfect, he answered, turning to look into my eyes. Because she also said the best things in life require hard work. The closeness between us deepened. The soft wind messed up his dark hair, and I noticed small scars on his fingers that I had never seen before, reminders of the work he loved. His eyes reflected the city lights and something deeper, something vulnerable and intense. Alex, I'm terrified of you leaving, he confessed, his voice almost a whisper. But I'm even more terrified at the thought of not trying to make this work. My reply was to lean forward, eliminating the small gap between us. Our lips met hesitantly at first, then with growing urgency. His hands rose to my face, holding me like I was something precious and fragile. Mine found their way under his jacket, feeling the warmth of his skin through the thin t-shirt. The last time I was up here, I murmured against his mouth, I was considering going back to Portland. And now, he asked, moving just far enough away to look into my eyes. Now I'm thinking about how I'm going to have to buy ridiculously expensive plane tickets just to come back to you every weekend. The door to my apartment barely closed behind us when Ethan pressed me against the wall, his quickened breath mixing with mine. The walk from the rooftop all the way back was a sweet kind of torture, every elevator ride and every glance in the hall held the promise of what was coming next. The surprise, he whispered, his lips trailing a path along my neck, wasn't just the rooftop. His skilled hands I had seen saving lives and handling heavy equipment, were now unbuttoning my shirt with surprising gentleness. Each button revealed more skin, and Ethan continued along that path with kisses that made me forget even my own name. The apartment was dark, lit only by the city lights streaming through the windows. In that dim light, his eyes shone with an intensity that consumed me. I led him to the bedroom, where he stopped me at the door. "Hold on," he said with a mysterious smile on his lips. When he turned on the bedside lamp, I understood the rest of the surprise. The room had been transformed, petals were scattered over the bed, candles were strategically placed, not lit yet, a typical safety caution of a firefighter, and there was a small box on the nightstand. "You planned all this," I said, feeling a wave of emotion. "Ever since you mentioned Seattle," he confessed. I wanted our last night before you left to be unforgettable. Our clothes found their way to the floor in a slow, deliberate dance. Each piece removed was accompanied by exploratory touches and kisses that left trails of fire on my skin. Ethan guided me to the bed like we were performing a well-rehearsed choreography, our breathing synchronizing in a rising rhythm of desire. His muscles, honed from years of physical work, contrasted with the softness of his touches. My hand explored every inch of his body, discovering old scars and new sensitivities. When our bodies finally joined, it was as if two constellations had collided, a cosmic event contained within four walls. Time lost its meaning as we moved together. We were like instruments being tuned to the same frequency, each sigh and moan composing our own unique symphony. Ethan knew exactly how to touch me as if he had memorized a map of my body and my deepest desires. "Alex," he whispered in my ear, his voice husky with desire, "you have no idea how long I've waited for this." Our intertwined bodies were like waves in the ocean, moments of calm followed by storms of passion. When we climaxed together, it felt like diving into a whirlwind of sensation so intense that for a moment I lost track of where my body ended and his began. Later, as we caught our breath, Ethan pulled me against his chest. The steady rhythm of his heart gradually returning to normal was the most comforting sound I'd ever heard. His fingers traced random patterns on my back as mine explored the lines of his jaw. "I guess we should light the candles now," I teased. It would be an awful irony if a firefighter started a fire by forgetting the candles. His laugh echoed in my ear. Professionally speaking, leaving candles lit while doing what we just did would be extremely dangerous. The sun was just starting to rise when we finally succumbed to sleep, our bodies exhausted but satisfied and still tangled together like vines. I woke hours later with Ethan watching me, his eyes gentle and contemplative. "Good morning," I murmured, sinking further into his embrace. "How long have you been staring at me?" "Long enough to memorize every detail of your face," he replied, planting a soft kiss on my forehead. "I'm going to need those memories in the coming weeks." The reality of my impending departure hovered over us like a cloud, but somehow it seemed less threatening in the light of day. What we had shared the night before wasn't just physical, it was an emotional crossing that made the distance just a logistical hurdle rather than an insurmountable barrier. Ethan got up first and returned moments later with 2 cups of coffee. He sat on the edge of the bed and picked up the small box from the nightstand. "I planned to give this to you last night," he explained as he handed me the package, "but we got distracted." I opened the box to find a silver chain with a pendant shaped like an old key. The design was intricate, with tiny details that I had to lean in close to see clearly, small symbols engraved on the metal surface. "It's a replica of a Chicago fire key," he explained, visibly nervous about my reaction. In the 19th century, firefighters used these keys to access alarm boxes scattered around the city. This one even has the coordinates of the cafe where we met engraved on it. I felt a lump forming in my throat as I turned the pendant between my fingers, watching it catch the morning light. "To remind you that no matter where you are, you'll always have access to me," he continued, his voice choked with emotion. "And to the place that brought us together." I put the chain on, feeling the reassuring weight of the metal against my skin. The emotion that overwhelmed me was immense, a mix of gratitude, affection, and a disconcerting feeling of having found something precious only to leave it behind for a while. "It's the most meaningful gift I've ever received," I confessed, holding his face in my hands. We spent the rest of the day in our own bubble, rarely moving more than a few inches apart. We prepared meals together, finalized the details of my trip, and occasionally went back to bed, rediscovering each other with the urgency of knowing that time was limited. At night, while watching a movie that neither of us was really following, I reflected on how our relationship had evolved. What had started as a casual attraction had grown into something deep and substantial, something worth every effort we were about to invest. "What are you thinking about so intently?" Ethan asked, noticing my prolonged silence. "How much my life has changed since that day at the cafe," I replied honestly. "I never thought losing a laptop could be the best thing that ever happened to me." He smiled, that smile that still made my heart skip a beat. "I'm glad those sprinklers spectacularly failed." After breakfast, we exchanged gifts. Ethan gave me a vintage watch he had found at an antique store, the kind of mechanical piece I'd always admired but never bought for myself. My gift for him was more practical, tickets to a workshop on advanced rescue techniques that he had been talking about for months. During our traditional walk in the park, with Seattle's bay shining in the distance under the autumn sun, Ethan squeezed my hand a little tighter than usual. "You know what I sometimes think about," he said, looking at an elderly couple sitting on a nearby bench. "I think about how we almost never met. If I had arrived 5 minutes later at the cafe, if you had decided to work from home that day. Or if I had saved my work to the cloud like any sensible person," I added teasingly. "Exactly. So many little coincidences that led us to that very moment." He stopped and turned to look at me. "Makes you wonder how many other lives we could be living. And would you prefer one of those?" I asked, already knowing the answer but wanting to hear it anyway. "Not for a second," he replied without hesitation. "I'd choose you in this life in any reality, Alex. That's what I learned in these 3 years, that sometimes the best stories start in the most unexpected moments. That there's beauty in risking it all for someone worth it. That distance, when overcome, can strengthen bonds in ways we'd never imagine." If you're watching this video and you're wondering about taking that next step, about following someone to a new city or letting someone into your carefully built life, remember, the best chapters often begin with that scary question, what if? Hit like if this story touched you in any way and subscribe for more stories about how unexpected encounters can transform entire lives. Next week, I'll share how Ethan and I navigated the challenges of his high-risk job and my anxiety, because loving a firefighter is learning to trust the impossible every single day. And never forget, sometimes something literally has to catch fire in order for us to find exactly what we didn't even know we were looking for. O'Hare Airport was particularly busy that Thursday morning. Ethan had insisted on driving me, taking advantage of his 24-hour day off after an exhausting shift. I watched his profile as he drove, noticing the fine lines of tiredness around his eyes. He had come straight from the station to my apartment without sleep, just to make sure he had these last few hours with me. "You should be resting," I said, lightly touching his face. "I've got 6 months to rest without you around," he replied with a tired smile. "I can sacrifice a few hours of sleep." Check-in was quick, but the security line seemed never-ending. Standing there with my check bag and only my backpack with me, the reality of our separation started to weigh on me. The key pendant felt heavier against my chest. "Promise you'll call as soon as you land?" Ethan asked, his fingers tightly interlacing with mine in a gesture that revealed his anxiety. "And every night before we sleep," I assured him. "We're going to make this work, Ethan. 6 months will pass faster than we think." The line moved forward, and our goodbye was drawing near. That's when I noticed Ethan seemed strangely restless, checking his phone repeatedly and glancing around as if looking for someone. "Are you okay?" I asked, concerned about his behavior. He took a deep breath, as if summoning courage. "Actually, I have something to tell you before you board." My heart raced. In my experience, conversations that start like this rarely bring good news. Ethan led me away from the line to a quieter corner near a cafe. "Remember when I mentioned I was talking to a few contacts about job opportunities?" he began, his eyes fixed on mine. I nodded, vaguely recalling a conversation we'd had weeks earlier. Ethan had mentioned he was dissatisfied with some aspects of his current role and was considering options. "I got an offer yesterday," he continued, his face lighting up with controlled excitement. "From the Seattle Fire Department." It took a few seconds for the words to sink in. "Seattle? You're saying?" "I'm saying that if you want, we don't have to do this long-distance thing. I can transfer. The process would take about a month to finish." The surprise left me momentarily speechless. Ethan went on, his words flowing as if he had rehearsed this speech over and over. "I don't want you to feel pressured. If you'd prefer we stick to our original plan of visits and video calls, I completely understand. Seattle has one of the best departments in the country, so it makes sense for me professionally regardless of us. But..." He hesitated, vulnerability clear in his eyes. The idea of being in the same city as you, of building something together without geographic barriers, feels right in a way I can't explain. Tears welled up in my eyes as I processed what he was proposing. It was a huge gesture, moving cities, leaving his team, starting over in a new department. The magnitude of the offer wasn't lost on me. "It's such a big decision, Ethan," I finally replied. "Your family is here, your team, your whole life. Lives change, Alex. People change." He took my hands in his. "I'm not doing this on a whim. It's an excellent professional opportunity in a renowned department. And yes, the idea of being with you is an amazing bonus, but I don't want you to shoulder the weight of this decision." I looked at our interlaced fingers, feeling a confused mix of emotions, joy, apprehension, hope, and above all, a deep feeling that maybe, just maybe, this relationship was different from all the others. And what if it doesn't work out? I mean, between us, I asked, voicing my biggest fear. Ethan smiled with a calm that surprised me. "Then I'll have an excellent position in a top-notch department and get to explore a new city. Alex, I'm not asking for guarantees. I'm just choosing to bet on us, just like you bet on a fresh start when you moved to Chicago." The overhead speaker announced priority boarding for my flight, signaling that my turn would come soon. We only had a few minutes. "I don't need an answer right now," said Ethan, caressing my face. "Think it over during your flight. Talk to your friends in Seattle and see how you feel once the initial excitement passes." But I already knew my answer. There was something in the way Ethan had planned this, giving me space, assuring me that it was a good decision for him regardless of us, and acknowledging the risks, that showed an emotional maturity I rarely found in past relationships. "Yes," I simply replied. "I want to try. I want you to come." His smile lit up his tired face, as if years instantly melted away. "Are you sure? We can start with visits and see how it goes." I interrupted him with a kiss, ignoring the glances from fellow passengers. When we pulled apart, I rested my forehead against his. "I'm sure. Let's figure it out together." The final boarding call for my flight echoed through the terminal. Ethan walked me to the security boundary, where we said goodbye, not with promises to survive the distance, but with a promise to build something new together. "1 month," he said, cradling my face in his hands. "In a month, I'll be in Seattle." "I'll be waiting," I replied, touching the pendant at my neck. "With hot coffee and an apartment for us to hunt for together." 6 months turned into 3 years. The temporary apartment in Seattle became our permanent home, a spacious place with a view of Puget Sound, decorated with a curious mix of cutting-edge technology and firefighter antiques that Ethan collects. The transition wasn't perfect, of course. There were tough moments. Ethan's first weeks in the new department were challenging as he had to prove himself again. My project extended for 9 months instead of the planned 6, with exhausting hours that tested our patience. There were nights when he came home covered in soot, the smell of smoke clinging to his skin, and I realized just how much he risked his life every day. There were days when I spent 20 hours straight coding, while he tried to understand my obsession with solving problems most people didn't even know existed. But every obstacle taught us something new about ourselves and our relationship. When Ethan's mom fell ill, we flew to Chicago without hesitation, and she embraced me as if she'd known me for years. When I received an offer to start my own digital security consulting firm, Ethan rearranged his schedule to be present at the very first meeting with investors. We learned the delicate balance between independence and partnership. That specific morning, I woke up to the smell of freshly brewed coffee and the soft sound of Ethan moving around in the kitchen. It was our 3-year anniversary, counting from that first coffee after the sprinkler incident. We had traditions for the day, an elaborate breakfast, exchanging simple yet meaningful gifts, and a walk in the same park, no matter the weather. I found him making pancakes, his strong body moving with a familiar grace in the space we shared. The scars on his arms had deepened, the testament to his commitment to saving lives. His hair now had a few strands of silver, mostly at the temples, adding an unexpected charm that I adored. "Good morning," he murmured without turning around, sensing my presence as always. "Happy anniversary." I walked up behind him and wrapped my arms around him, feeling the comforting warmth of his body. "Happy anniversary. Need any help?" "Just your company," he replied, turning to give me a brief kiss. "And maybe whip up that maple syrup sauce only you can make just right." We worked in sync, moving around the kitchen like dancers who knew each other's steps perfectly. As we prepared breakfast, I reflected on the unlikely journey that led us here, from a false alarm at a Chicago cafe to a life built together in Seattle. "What are you thinking so deeply about?" Ethan asked as he set the dishes on the small table on the balcony, where we like to have breakfast on dry days. "About how much my life has changed since that day at the cafe," I answered honestly. "How losing a laptop turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me." He smiled, that smile that still made my heart race. "I'm glad those sprinklers spectacularly failed." After breakfast, we exchanged gifts. Ethan gave me a vintage watch he'd found at an antique store, the kind of mechanical piece I'd always admired but never treated myself to. My gift for him was more practical, tickets for a workshop on advanced rescue techniques he'd been mentioning for months. During our customary walk through the park, with the Seattle Bay glistening in the distance under the autumn sun, Ethan squeezed my hand a little tighter than usual. "You know, sometimes I think about how we almost never met," he said, looking at an elderly couple seated on a nearby bench. "If I had gotten to the cafe 5 minutes later, if you had chosen to work from home that day. Or if I had saved my work to the cloud like any sensible person," I teased. "Exactly. So many little coincidences that led us to this very moment." He stopped and turned to face me. "Makes you wonder how many other lives we could be living. And would you prefer one of them?" I asked, already knowing the answer but wanting to hear it anyway. "Not for a second," he replied without hesitation. "I'd choose you in this life in any reality, Alex. That's what I learned in these 3 years, that sometimes the best stories start at the most unexpected moments. That there's beauty in risking it all for someone who's worth it."